Part 150. Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1491. The village I lived in before was in the suburbs not far from Tianfu City. The village is not too big, nor is it backward, but it is somewhat different from the villages in the city. This is the first time I have returned here since the death of my family. Along the way, I felt extremely heavy. Su Tianxian saw what I was thinking, stretched out his hand, and gently held my hand to express comfort. Soon, the car drove to the entrance of the village. To my surprise, I don't know when it started. The dirt road before the village had disappeared and was replaced by a cement road. The road was crisscrossed and looked clean and tidy. In the past, cars with low chassis could not enter the village at all, but now, the Porsche can easily drive into it. When a red and luxurious Porsche appeared in the village, it instantly attracted the attention of many people. People from every house went out to look around. Our Lu family has a relatively high status in the village and is respected by everyone in the village. The main reason is my grandfather. Although my grandfather has lost his moral integrity, he still retains his knowledge. Moreover, if every household encounters some strange problem that cannot be solved, my grandfather can always come up with suggestions. I parked the car in front of the old house. As soon as I got out of the car, I saw villagers surrounding me. When the villagers saw me, they were stunned for a moment, and then someone exclaimed, "Isn't this Xiao Su?" "It's really Xiao Su. He's still alive. Xiao Su is really handsome." I thought all the Lu family. The folks and elders are talking a lot, and I can understand this kind of discussion. Overnight, everyone in my Lu family died tragically, except for my third uncle and me. Later, my third uncle and I left the village and never came back. They were confused about this matter. I smiled at everyone and said, "I know everyone is very curious about what happened to my Lu family, but I can't explain this matter for a while. Thank you for your concern." After hearing what I said, the villagers sighed and expressed regret and sympathy for what happened to my family. I exchanged a few polite words with them, and the villagers turned their attention to Su Tianxian. "Why does this girl look like a fairy? Just tell me. This girl is so beautiful, isn't she? Xiao Su, who is this girl to you? You can't talk about your wife, can you?" No matter where Su Tianxian goes, she is always the center of attention. Faced with everyone's comments, Su Tianxian's expression did not change much. I introduced to everyone, let me introduce, this is my wife, Su Tianxian." As soon as these words came out, the villagers exclaimed, "Xiao Su, you are so lucky, aren't you? To have married such a beautiful wife." "Yes. Yes. You are so lucky to have such a beautiful girl. Xiao Su, when are you going to have your wedding? We fellow villagers can go and attend the ceremony." After hearing these words, Su Tianxian's pretty face turned slightly red, and her eyes were full of shame. "I will tell everyone about the wedding. Don't be anxious." Afterwards, I talked to everyone again and then returned to the house. I looked at Su Tianxian and said with a smile, "Now, everyone knows that you are my wife." Su Tianxian glanced at me and asked, "Isn't this bad?" "Okay. Of course. It is the luckiest thing for me, Lu Su, to marry such a beautiful wife like you." Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1492. Glib Tongue. Su Tianxian groaned. I smiled and looked at the dusty room, my mind a little dazed. I have lived here for more than 20 years, and everything here has changed, but it seems that it has not changed. The furnishings of the furniture in the house are still the same as before, without any changes, but, my family is here and will never come back. Su Tianxian is a very sensitive woman. She saw what I was thinking, stepped forward, took my hand, and said softly, "Don't be sad, you still have me. I pointed to the room where Su Tianqian lived before and said, when you first came to my house, you said you would live here. At that time, you were so cold and aloof. I felt a little scared when I looked at you. Su Tianqian chuckled and said, why don't you think about how you misunderstood me and how you made me angry? I smiled awkwardly and took Su Tianqian into my arms. Su Tianqian sat on my lap and looked at me quietly. Then now do you want to vent your anger for the grievances you suffered at that time? Punish me. Express your anger? How to vent your anger? Su Tianqian asked doubtfully. I pointed at my mouth. Su Tianqian rolled his eyes at me and said, is this a punishment? It's clearly a reward. Then do you want to reward me? Su Tianqian sighed helplessly and murmured in a low voice, little enemies. Saying this, she leaned forward and her cherry lips lightly touched my lips. When no one else is around, Su Tianqian is not very shy. On the contrary, he is very clingy to me and holds my hand all the time, for fear that I will suddenly disappear. Afterwards, Su Tianqian and I simply cleaned the room and tidied up before heading to my Lu family's ancestral grave. Su Tianqian and I walked along the mountain road to the village halfway up the mountain, where my family is buried. I looked at the tombstones in front of me and felt so sad that I fell to my knees with a plop and kowtowed 3 times at the graves of my parents, grandparents, and my second uncle. Mom, Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, second uncle, Xiao Su is back to see you, I said in a hoarse and low voice. I'm sorry, Xiao Su has only come back to see you now. Xiao Su has been taking good care of you since he left the village. Life. I told my relatives what had happened recently, including the confusion in my heart and the grievances I had suffered these days. As I spoke, I looked at Su Tianqian and stretched out my hand. She understood, gently held my hand, and knelt next to me. Mom, Dad, grandparents, my second uncle would like to introduce to you, this is my wife Su Tianqian. When I said this, I held Su Tianxian's hand tightly. She is a good girl, and she is someone Xiao Su wants to treat well throughout his life. Su Tianqian held my hand and said in a gentle tone, I will take good care of Xiao Su, please don't worry. Yes. She will definitely take good care of me. When the time comes, we will try to give you a big fat boy. I looked at Su Tianqian, her pretty face was slightly red and her eyes were averted. After paying homage to our family members, Su Tianqian and I returned to our old home. I came to the room where my parents lived before they were alive, and after searching for a long time, I finally found what I wanted to find. I hid something and came to Su Tianqian. Seeing my mysterious look, she asked, what's wrong? I want to give you a gift. A gift? What gift? I took the thing out from behind. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1493. Su Tianqian was slightly startled when he saw what I was holding, and then took it immediately. Household registration book. I smiled and said, yes. It's the household registration book. We'll get the certificate when we get back to Tianfu City. As for the wedding, we'll wait until everything is over, to apply for it again. Su Tianqian looked at the household registration book in her hand with soft eyes. She slowly raised her head and said to me, Xiao Su, isn't this a little too hasty? Ah. I looked at Su Tianqian in confusion and asked, hasty? Why are you so sloppy? Su Tianxian's face showed a look of resentment, her red lips parted slightly, and she said quietly, you haven't proposed yet, isn't it rash to try to prove it like this? I immediately froze on the spot, I wanted to slap myself in the mouth for doing this. I didn't even propose, so I took Su Tianqian to get the certificate. Although she was pure and refined, aloof, and indifferent, in the final analysis, Su Tianqian was also a woman who longed for love and romance, but I ignored this. I scratched my head in annoyance and said, "Look, I was too anxious, so I forgot about it." I stretched out my hand to grab the household registration book from Su Tianxuan's hand, but Su Tianqian raised his hand slightly and hid. "Look at how embarrassed you are." Su Tianqian covered her mouth and chuckled, and said, "Leave this household registration book with me. When you propose to me, I will get the certificate with you." "Good." I agreed. In my opinion, a proposal cannot be simple, it must be grand. As a manifestation of love, this matter can only be postponed until after returning to Tianfu City. In the evening, Su Tianqian and I sat in the kitchen to eat. "We are not going back tonight and plan to stay here overnight. After all, we finally came back and I don't know if I can come back again in the future." While I was eating, I heard footsteps in the yard, and I walked out with my rice bowl. I saw an old man with gray hair standing in the courtyard. When I saw the old man, I was slightly startled and shouted in surprise, "Grandpa Fu." The old man was very excited to see me and walked towards me tremblingly. "Xiao Su, it's really you. You're still alive." I thought. Mr. Fu is the head of our village and a close friend of my grandfather. Our two families are close friends. Moreover, Mr. Fu's granddaughter is the same age as me and we were classmates in elementary school, junior high school, and high school. Fu Laolao burst into tears and held my arm tightly. "Mr. Fu, I'm worrying you," I said. You kid really doesn't make people worry. Since you are alive, why don't you go back to the village as soon as possible to report that you are safe? Mr. Fu's concern for me is sincere. He said he would treat me like his grandson. I have received a lot of favors from him since I was a child. Mr. Fu, it's not that I won't come back, it's just that there are some things that prevent me from coming back," I explained to Mr. Fu. Just as Mr. Fu and I were reminiscing about old times, a little head poked out from the door. I was slightly startled when I saw the man. It was a girl, with a pure and lovely appearance, and a playful look on her eyebrows. When she saw me, she looked excited and shouted, "Xiao Suzy! You are not dead." The girl ran towards me and grabbed my hand excitedly. The girl's name is Fu Huiwai, who is Mr. Fu's granddaughter. "Fu Huiwai, why are you in the village? Shouldn't you be in school now?" Fu Huiwai looked at me excitedly and replied, "It's summer vacation." "Xiao Suzy, that's great. You're not dead." Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1494. "There are not many children my age in the village," Fu Huiwai said, one of them, "and Fu Huiwai has been beautiful and had numerous suitors since she was a child. Let's put it this way, as long as there is no boy of similar age in our village who doesn't like her or have a crush on her, of course, I am one of them. After all, I was not sensible when I was a child and always yearned for beautiful things. I remember that I confessed my love to Fu Huiwai, but the result was that I was given a good guy card. Not only in the village, but also when Fu Huiwai was in school, there were many people pursuing Fu Huiwai, but she kept herself clean and never had a partner." Seeing this scene from the side, Mr. Fu burst out laughing and said, "Xiao Su, you don't know. Huiwai cried for a long time when she learned that something happened in your family, and your life or death was uncertain." "Grandpa," Fu Huiwai said angrily, "what are you talking about?" Mr. Fu just laughed on the side. It made Fu Huiwai blush. Seeing this, I wondered and cried for a long time. Could this girl like me? Fu Huiwai pulled me to ask questions, but Su Tianqian never came out. With her character, she rarely gets involved in such things. Fu Huiwai looked at me, a trace of determination flashed in her eyes, and she said to me, "Xiao Suzy, come with me. Is there something you can't say here?" Fu Huiwei shook her head and glanced at Mr. Fu, only to see an ambiguous look on Mr. Fu's face. No, you can come with me. I followed Fu Huiwei out of the yard. Fu Huiwei raised her eyes to look at me, with a flash of shame in her eyes. Xiao Suzy, can you still remember your confession to me when you were in junior high school? My heart thumped. No way, this girl really likes me? Remember, you rejected me at that time. Fu Huiwei bit her lips lightly and whispered, the reason why I rejected you, is because we are still young. I originally wanted to wait until I graduate from college to confess to you and be with you, but suddenly something happened. The corner of my mouth twitched slightly. I really didn't expect that Fu Huiwei also liked me, but all this is not that important anymore. To show respect, I also said to listen to Fu Huiwei. I know, it's very presumptuous for me to say this suddenly, but, I'm afraid that you will disappear suddenly, so I have to tell you, Lu Su, I really like you, I have liked you for a long time, otherwise, I will also you can't say no to everyone. So, Lu Su, are you willing to be with me? Fu Huiwei looked at me expectantly. I sighed slightly and said, sorry, I can't promise you because, I have someone I like. Fu Huiwei immediately froze on the spot, her eyes full of disappointment, and asked, who is it? Can you take me to see her? Okay, she's in the house. Fu Huiwei followed me in despair. When I returned to the yard, I saw Su Tianxian walking out of the room. She looked at me faintly, with no expression on her face. She glanced at me, then turned around and went back to the house. No way, Su Tianxian was actually jealous. Because Fu Huiwei was standing behind me and did not see Su Tianxian, I invited Mr. Fu and Fu Huiwei into the living room, and then went to find Su Tianxian. I saw Su Tianxian with his back to me. After hearing this, he came in and didn't look back. I came to her and asked, what? Are you jealous? Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1495. Su Tianxian glanced at me faintly and said, no. I smiled, stretched out my hand, gently put my arm around Su Tianxian's shoulders, and said, don't be angry, she and I have nothing to do with each other. We just grew up together and have a better relationship. Su Tianxian murmured faintly, childhood sweethearts. I couldn't help but shake my head and smile bitterly. What should I say? Girls in love will have lower IQs. Don't think too much, my heart, Lu Su, is very small, so small that it can only accommodate you alone. This sentence was said to me by Su Tianxian, and now, I return it to her intact. Su Tianxian raised his head, looked at me, and asked, Xiao Su, I didn't think you were outstanding before, but now. Before she could finish her words, I interrupted her. Okay, don't think too much, people will change, but in front of you, I will not change. I have always been the Lu Su who needs you to protect and take care of me. When I first entered this world, I was timid, weak in strength. But as time goes by, I have become stronger, and when faced with some things, I will not be as cowardly as I was at the beginning. However, I, Lu Su, have never forgotten that it was Su Tianxian who brought me hope and led me out of the darkness when I was in despair. Okay, I will always protect you and take care of you. I smiled and replied, I should have said this. Later, I took Su Tianxian to meet Mr. Fu and Fu Huiwei. When Mr. Fu and Fu Huiwei saw Su Tianxian, they were stunned on the spot. Xiao Su, this is. I smiled and introduced, Mr. Fu, this is my lover Su Tianxian. Su Tianxian nodded politely towards Mr. Fu. Mr. Fu took a deep breath and said, Xiao Su, this girl, is so beautiful. After saying this, Mr. Fu glanced at Fu Huiwei. Fu Huiwei's face was also full of shock. After being shocked, she lowered her eyes and didn't know what she was thinking. I was chatting with Mr. Fu. As we were chatting, Fu Huiwei stood up, came to Su Tianqian and said, "Sister, come with me. I have something to tell you." Su Tianqian glanced at me and I nodded. Good. Su Tianqian and Fu Huiwei left the house and stood in the courtyard, wondering what they were talking about. After a while, Su Tianqian and the two came back. Su Tianqian took a deep look, with smiles in her eyes. Her look made me a little panicked. What on earth did Fu Huiwei say to Su Tianqian? Mr. Fu stood up and said, "Okay, it's getting late. It's time for me to leave." I stood up to see them off, and watched Mr. Fu and Fu Huiwei leave. I sighed slightly, and then turned to look at Su Tianqian. Su Tianqian glanced at it, turned around and left. I quickly chased after him and asked, "Tianqian, what did Fu Huiwei say to you?" Su Tianqian ignored me and came to the bathroom to start washing up. I stood next to her and asked. But no matter how I asked, Su Tianqian ignored me and went about her own business. She turned around, glanced at me, and asked, "I want to take a shower." I was slightly startled and said with a smile, "Just wash it? How about we wash it together?" Su Tianqian rolled his eyes, pushed me out, and then slammed the bathroom door. The corner of my mouth twitched slightly. What did this Fu Huiwei say to Su Tianqian? This made me extremely curious. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1496. About half an hour later, Su Tianqian opened the door. I followed the sound and saw that the bathroom was filled with water mist, pouring out, and a pair of slender white jade legs slowly stepped out of the mist, giving a sense of sight as if they were holding a pipa half hiding their faces. My house is not particularly old. It was built 7 or 8 years ago, and it is considered to be relatively good in our village. Su Tianqian was wrapped in a bath towel, with long, dark, wet hair sticking to her fair skin. Her neck was slender and fair, her collarbones were sexy, her figure was graceful and beautiful, and her curves were extremely perfect. Tianqian. Before I finished speaking, Su Tianqian said calmly, "Go take a bath, or you can sleep alone later." I was slightly startled, stood up suddenly, and said quickly, "Wash, wash, wash." Although sleeping together doesn't do anything, being able to sleep with Su Tianqian in your arms is the happiest thing in the world. Soon, I walked into the bedroom. Su Tianqian had already put on her nightgown, lying on her side on the bed, holding a book in her hand and reading with gusto. In my impression, Su Tianqian likes reading very much. I have always been curious about what book she is reading. "Tianqian, what are you looking at?" Su Tianqian handed me the book in his hand. I opened it and took a look. The book was filled with Tang poetry and song lyrics. I thought they were about fortune-telling and divination. "You like seeing these?" I asked. Su Tianqian nodded and replied, "Yes, I prefer it. I read Tang poetry, song lyrics, Yuan music, Ming and Qing novels. I thought you only read some feng shui books every day. After reading the book on that subject, I have mastered it, so there is no need to read any more. Is this Versailles?" I put down the book in my hand and lay down in front of Su Tianqian. "No, I've always been smart." I smiled, put my arm around Su Tianqian, let him lean on my shoulder, and asked, "What did Fu Huiwei say to you?" "Want to know?" Su Tianqian was silent for a moment and replied, "Okay, then I will tell you. She told me that she has liked you for more than 10 years. "Ah," I was slightly startled and asked, "Then what?" "She said she would never give up and that as long as we were not married, she would stick to it." My throat squirmed, I stood up and said, I'm going to go find her now and make it clear. Su Tianxian covered her mouth and smiled sweetly, stretched out her hand to hold my hand, and said softly, "Okay, I lied to you." Actually, she didn't say anything. She originally wanted to fight for it, but after seeing me, she gave up and asked me to take good care of you and be happy. I breathed a long sigh of relief and said, "Tianxian, how dare you lie to me?" The reason why Fu Huiwei gave up was because she saw Su Tianxuan's perfection. I think all women in the world will pale in comparison to Su Tianxian. Su Tianxian blinked at me and said, "You are allowed to play tricks on me, but I am not allowed to play tricks on you." I was startled, rolled up my sleeves, and said, "Okay. I have to teach you a lesson today." With that said, I threw Su Tianxian on the bed and started scratching. "Xiao Su! Don't do this!" Su Tianxian screamed. I ignored her and started fighting with her. I don't know how long it took, but Su Tianxian leaned on my shoulder while panting lightly. "Xiao Su!" Su Tianxian suddenly murmured. "What's wrong? You want it?" Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1497. I want to, but if you don't want to, I won't force you. Su Tianxian lowered his eyebrows and thought for a moment, then raised his head and said, "Xiao Su, just wait, I'm not very convenient recently, but don't worry, it won't be long." I looked at Su Tianxian doubtfully and asked, "You mean, when it's convenient for you?" Before he finished speaking, Su Tianxian hummed softly. "Well, I have actually prepared it for a long time. I want to pass on the dragon energy in my body to you, so, you just have to endure it for a few more days." I looked at Su Tianxian blankly, then gently held him in my arms and said, "Tianxian, you are so kind. I actually want a baby because I don't want you to be alone." Hearing this sentence, I immediately froze on the spot. I sat up, looked at Su Tianxian with a scrutinizing gaze, and asked seriously, "What do you mean you don't want me to be alone?" A trace of panic flashed in Su Tianxuan's eyes, but he returned to normal immediately and said, "What I mean is, after you have a child, you will no longer be alone. You can't let me take care of the child alone, right?" I still looked at Su Tianxian with a scrutinizing gaze, and asked in a very serious tone, "You are lying to me, and besides, you are hiding something from me. Did your inheritance fail?" Su Tianxian rolled his eyes, stretched out his jade finger and poked my forehead, and said, "Xiao Su, why are you so sensitive recently? If I failed to inherit, how could I come to you with my personality?" I opened my mouth, hesitated for a while, and said, "It's not that I'm sensitive, it's that your recent behavior is too abnormal." Su Tianxian opened her arms, hugged me gently, and said softly, "Okay, Xiao Su, don't worry, my inheritance has not failed, it has succeeded. From now on, I will always be with you. If you want to leave me, I'll just let you go." I reached out my hand, stroked Su Tianxuan's hair, and said, "Silly girl, don't say such unlucky words. We will always be together and grow old together. If one of us wants to leave, don't do anything stupid. Because, once we die, no one in this world can miss each other like you and I do. After we die, we can't even remember or miss each other." "Well, I understand." Su Tianxian suddenly thought of something, raised his head and asked, "Xiao Su, there is something I haven't asked you about. The sky coffin can't support it for too long. Is there any way you can make up for it?" There was a thump in my heart. How could Su Tianxian know about this matter? My brain was working rapidly and I replied, "I saw Grandpa. He has already arranged everything. You don't need to worry about me." "Real?" Su Tianxian asked suspiciously. "Really, do you still remember the man wearing a hat?" Su Tianxian was startled for a moment, then nodded and replied, "Remember." He has told my grandfather about repairing the sky coffin. His old man has arranged everything. What we have to do now is to conquer the remaining 3 evil spirits. Su Tianqian was convinced, and she said, "Okay, there are 3 remaining evil spirits, do you know where they are?" The remaining 3 evil spirits are Huo Qubing and Sudaji. As for the best evil, I don't know. I have no clue who the last evil spirit is. Last time in Grandpa's fantasy, I was about to see the remaining 3 evil spirits, but Grandpa deliberately hid them. Sky Coffin. Author, Qingnian Wanbao. Chapter 1498. Tianqian, do you know about this last evil? I asked Su Tianqian. Su Tianqian shook his head and replied, I don't know, but in my memory, this last evil is related to you. I don't know what it is specifically. No matter how difficult the road ahead is, I will walk with you. The last evil is related to me? What does it mean? Is it the people around me? Or is it someone I didn't expect? Alas. I let out a long sigh and said, okay, let's walk together in the future. No matter what difficulties we face, we will face them together. Just like that, I fell asleep with Su Tianqian in my arms. At night, I tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Because I lied to Su Tianqian, I used my 5 senses and limbs to repair the coffin. As time goes by, I will gradually lose my 5 senses and limbs. If I have been with Su Tianqian for a long time, she will definitely notice it. Sooner or later this matter cannot be hidden. But, I can hide it for a day. When that day comes, I will make plans. Whether I should face it with Su Tianqian or bear it alone, I have to think about it again. The thing to do now is to enjoy the moment. This kind of quiet time is very rare, and I don't know if it will happen again in the future. I looked at Su Tianqian, who was sleeping soundly in my arms, raised the corners of my mouth, leaned down, kissed her forehead gently, then leaned against her and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I slowly opened my eyes and found that Su Tianqian had already gotten up. I very considerately put my change of clothes on the bedside. After I got dressed and walked out of the bedroom, I saw Su Tianqian wearing an apron and carrying dishes out of the kitchen. Are you awake? You go and wash up first, and then eat? Su Tianqian said softly. I nodded, went to the bathroom, and found that Su Tianqian had already squeezed out toothpaste for me. Seeing this scene, I was filled with warmth. Su Tianqian is the most perfect existence in the world, satisfying all men's fantasies about their significant other. She is beautiful, aloof, and a little playful at the same time. The most important thing is that in front of others, she is an iceberg beauty, but in front of me, she is a little woman. In addition, she is also very virtuous. If you get this wife, what else can your husband ask for? I washed up, then came to the dining table and started eating with Su Tianqian. Let's pack up later and go back to Tianfu City. I promised you a date. Su Tianqian was startled, looked at me, and asked, actually, being alone with you is the best date for me. I smiled and said, you are so easily satisfied. Su Tianqian and I were chatting one after another. At this moment, there was a burst of noise outside the hospital. I stood up full of doubts and saw Mr. Fu hurriedly barging in. Xiao Su. Something bad has happened. I handed down the bowl and chopsticks in my hand, stood up to greet him, and said, Mr. Fu, what happened? Mr. Fu was breathless in the last issue and said, there is something wrong with the Fox Fairy Temple in the village, your grandfather must have taught you something. Go and see what happened. There is a Fox Fairy seedling in the east of our village. I don't know who built this Fox Fairy Temple, and I don't know how long it took to build it. Over the years, the village has been going to worship during every festival, and the incense is very strong. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sky Coffin. Author, Ching Nian Wanba. Chapter 1499. I signaled Mr. Fu to be patient and asked him to tell me more about the Fox Fairy Temple. I invited Mr. Fu into the house and poured him a glass of water. Mr. Fu took a sip of water and said, "Xiao Su, do you still remember your brother Hu?" I was slightly startled and replied, "Is it the one from the Lin family in the east of the village?" "Yeah." Mr. Fu nodded repeatedly and said, "That's him. Last night, the boy from the Lin family seemed to be possessed by an evil spirit. He was crying, making trouble, and seeking death. He was also shouting that the Fox Fairy would kill everyone in the village." The Hu brother that Mr. Fu mentioned was 3 years older than me, and his full name was Hu Songzi. In fact, his real surname was Lin. The reason why he changed his surname and name was because of my grandfather. Hu Songzi is the boy who the Fox Fairy sits down on, and it is the boy who is sent by the Fox Fairy, which is the boy's destiny. The boy is also called the Child of Heaven, which originally refers to the immortal in the sky or the child who serves the gods. Due to various reasons, he came down to earth and was reincarnated as a human being. The boy's destiny is a numerological concept and it is real. Every Tiandao child will experience catastrophic disasters before he or she understands his life experience. Basically, every Tiandao child's experience is very miserable. It makes people sad when they hear it, and sheds tears when they see it. In fact, Tiandao boys have more immortal connections than ordinary people and are very talented in practicing Buddhism and Taoism. There are 4 reasons why children come down to earth. The first type is the sneak boy. As the name suggests, most of the boys who sneak down from the sky are too tired from the work in the sky and sneak away to play in the mortal world. This kind of boy is born fair, Jing, smart and very lovable. But a child who runs away will die before the age of 10 because he has to return to heaven. The second type is the demoted boy. Most of these boys are Sifan. They did something wrong in the heaven and were demoted to the mortal world. This kind of boy is similar to the boy who ran away, but the difference is that this kind of boy can grow up. When you grow up, you will be naturally beautiful and refined. Although you will not die after disappearing, but before the age of 25, your life will be very difficult, and your life may even be in danger. The third type, mission boys, come down to earth to perform tasks. This kind of boy has a deep connection with Taoism and Buddhism. After completing the task, he will return to heaven. If he fails to complete the task, he will continue to be reincarnated. The fourth type is like Hu Songzi, a boy who is a cultivator who sits down in the immortal family. When he grows up, he will be taken back to sit down. In this world, there is a very special kind of boy who is rarely seen in millions of years. That is the King of Hell sending his son. The King of Hell gave birth to his son, who was born to Yama of the 10th palace. He was born as the emperor of the human world and died as the ghost emperor of the underworld. In this life, there are no taboos, no restraints, and the appearance of an emperor. His fate is far more special than mine, so it is rare to meet him in thousands of years. But, the King of Hell will send a son to him, and he will not survive until the age of 18. Once he reaches the age of 18, the King of Hell will ask for his life. Because it is difficult to survive without death and against the laws of heaven. After death, it will not be smooth sailing in the underworld, because the underworld restricts his freedom. This kind of person is fighting against heaven and earth, and no one can restrain him. I looked at Mr. Fu and said, "How is Brother Hu doing now?" Mr. Fu replied, "I have a high fever, I am in a daze, and I am talking nonsense." I glanced at Su Tianxian, and she nodded slightly at me. Then, I said to Mr. Fu, "Let's go, take me to see Brother Hu." Mr. Fu nodded in agreement, and Su Tianxian and I went to the Lin family. The area outside Lin's house was full of people, and the villagers were talking a lot when they saw Mr. Fu coming. They quickly made way. Stop watching the excitement. It's time to leave. It's time to leave. Sky Coffin. Author, Qing Nian Wanbao. Chapter 1500. The villagers did not retreat, but gathered around and asked, "Village chief, is it true what the boy from the Lin family said? The great fox elixir will take us all away." Mr. Fu sternly scolded, "Don't talk nonsense. There are so many weird things." The villagers were still asking questions around Mr. Fu. When I saw this, I said, "Fellow folks, don't worry. I got my grandfather's true biography. I can solve such a small matter." When the villagers saw me speaking, they all asked, "Xiao Su, are you telling the truth? Did your grandfather really pass on his skills to you?" I nodded and replied, "Yes, my grandfather passed on his skills to me. You don't need to worry. With me here, the village will be safe." When the villagers saw what I said, they gave up. Mr. Fu and I walked into the room. There are 3 members of the Lin family, Hu Songzi and his parents. My grandfather once told me that the Lin family would suffer a disaster because of Hu Songzi, and the whole family would die tragically. However, my grandfather performed a ritual for them, and the Lin family would be safe. Entering the house, they saw Hu Songzi's parents sitting in the living room crying. Hearing someone coming in, he quickly looked around and saw that it was the village chief. Father Hu quickly stood up and said, "Village chief, didn't you say you were looking for the great immortal? Have you found him?" Mr. Fu looked at me and said, "I thought about it, and the yin-yang teachers in our village and nearby villages are not as capable as Xiao Su, so I invited Xiao Su." "Xiao Su?" Father Hu looked at me doubtfully. When he saw me, he was slightly startled, and then shouted in shock, "Xiao Su, are you not dead?" I smiled and said, "Uncle Lin, I'm not dead. Don't worry. I will definitely help you solve Brother Hu's matter." Father Hu stepped forward and held my hand excitedly, and said, "Xiao Su, Xiao Su, your Lu family is the benefactor of my Lin family. If it weren't for your grandfather, all of us in the Lin family would have died long ago. It's really shameful that I have to trouble you to take action now." I waved my hand and said, "Uncle Lin, you're welcome. You and I are from the same village, fellow villagers. It's not uncommon to be so polite. Take me to meet Brother Hu." Father Hu nodded and led me into the room. Inside the room, a man in his mid-20s was tied to the bed. The man looked haggard and pale, struggling on the bed like crazy, muttering, "The immortal is coming, we are all going to die. We are all going to die. Hurry. Let us go." I came to Hu Songzi. Hu Songzi didn't look at me either, he was still going crazy. I kneaded the formula with both hands and silently recited the King's In mantra in my heart. I placed it between Hu Songzi's eyebrows and saw a flash of golden light. Hu Songzi's crazy eyes gradually calmed down. He looked around blankly and asked, What's wrong with me?" I replied, "Brother Hu, you were bewitched by the fox fairy, but you are fine now." Hu Songzi looked at me for a long time, and asked, Are you Xiao Su?" I nodded. Hu Songzi looked very excited. Hu Songzi and I have a very good relationship. He took good care of me when we were in the village. Hu Songzi and I briefly reminisced about old times, and then asked, "Brother Hu, do you know who the immortal family above you is?" Hu Songzi was stunned for a moment, then shook his head and replied, I don't know very well. I only know that she is an extremely charming woman. She seems to be a fox fairy with Su."